Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with part 2 of a video that I did really recently, which is the palette tag. This was created by Allie Glines and Samantha March, and like I said, I did part 1 of this, not my last video but the video before, and that was the tag they created a couple of years ago. But they have recently released like part 2 of the palette tag, and that's what I'm doing today. So I'm gonna go through all of the questions in this tag and just share with you the palettes that I chose for each prompt. And yeah, without any further ado, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's just jump into the video. So this tag was definitely a bit more difficult than the first one, because the first one had a lot of like what I said in the previous video, like factual, like, you know, it wasn't a lot of choice. It was just like my oldest, my newest, my most affordable, my most expensive, which is obviously already things that are given. Like, it's not like you have to choose palettes for those, but this one definitely has more difficult prompts or like questions, I guess. So I guess we just have to get into it. The first one is my all-time favorite, which was a super difficult one to pick because I was thinking like, what is my favorite right now, like what is my favorite palette, and for that, like, it's an impossible question for me to answer. For example, I could have picked my like Anastasia gold palette because I really love that one, and it's like probably one that I really like treasure, but also would be able to use every single day without no problem. But I also thought like of the first part of this question, which is all-time favorite, and I was thinking like, what is a palette that I always like used to reach for, a palette that I used to consider like my special occasion palette, but still one that I really loved and I could easily use every day, and I figured that I would pick the palette I'm going to show you in a second, because it did kind of come into those factors. Like, it's a palette that I've loved since I got it. When I got it, it was very much like a special occasion palette. I wasn't that into eyeshadow back then, but every time I wanted to do like a nice eye look, I reached for that palette. I still love it. It's not like I've gone off it. It's not like I don't like it anymore. I still like it. It's maybe not my absolute favorite now, like considering what I have in my collection now, but it probably is my all-time favorite. So yeah, let me show you what palette I'm talking about. So the palette I'm talking about is my Soft Glam palette by Anastasia. It doesn't look very like well used, and again, I think it's because I do kind of save this as a special occasion palette, but I absolutely love this palette. This is probably my all-time favorite, although like I said, it's not my absolute favorite anymore. I probably would pick other neutral palettes over this now, but looking back at like my makeup history and what I've used, this is definitely my like all-time favorite. Like, I loved the Modern Renaissance when it first came out because it was the first kind of like palette that I really got into, really loved. But then when this came out, this just dethroned that straight away, and it has not really budged since. Like I said, it's still a palette that I really love and I adore, and that's why it's my all-time favorite. So the next prompt is new favorite, and for this one, again, there was so many palettes I could pick that I've fallen in love with recently. Like, for example, even the Anastasia gold palette, that is more of a new favorite, although I've had it now for over a year. But there's so many things that I could pick, but I thought about like how I can like answer this question with like a thing that I did not really used to, like, I don't know, it's just, you're gonna see what I mean when I show you the palette, but it's something that I recently really opened my eyes to, and I just had to pick this because this is definitely the favorite part of my eyeshadow collection now, and that is my singles. So I have, this is not all my single palettes, but it is majority of them. So I have these right here, and I just love my singles. They, like I said, are my favorite part of my collection now. I love them, and although they're not like a pre-made palettes, they still come in palettes, so I still think this counts. But yeah, like, I have so many like beautiful shades. Like, my most special shades is in my singles. Like, just look at that Cleon eyeshadow palette. Like, I love my singles so much, so I just had to pick my singles for that, because I have the most special shades in my collection in my singles, and they are the ones that make me the most happy. So there really wasn't anything else I could pick for this prompt. Next up, we have the question keep for the memories, and I decided to go with my Anastasia Amrezy palette. This is a palette, I still like it. I like this palette. It's a beautiful kind of, it has like pinky tones, which I really like. It still has those really orangey tones that are very common for Anastasia, but I do like this palette a lot. However, this would definitely be one that would be on the chopping block if I were, like, if I had to declutter some more palettes. But I am keeping this for the memory because this is a palette that I got from my boyfriend. He picked this up for me, and I think this might have been the first palette he picked up for me, like bought for me ever, which is why it's something that I definitely don't want to get rid of. I really like this palette. There's definitely shades in here that I adore. Like Barb in here is such a stunning shade. That's basically why I wanted the palette. Cupcake is also a really pretty one, and there's definitely a lot of shades in here that I really like, and I'm not planning to get rid of this anytime soon because I am keeping this for the memories. Next up we have the prompt Underrated, and for that I decided to go with my Oden's Eye Elva palette. So this one I am picking, I mean Oden's Eye is definitely getting a bit of hype, but this is definitely not a completely underrated palette. I just feel like it's not getting as much hype as some of the other palettes from them, like the Solmåne palette, or like Solmane, that's what a lot of people say, but it's actually Solmåne, which is the Swedish word, which means sun moon. That's aside the point, but the Solmåne palette, yeah, definitely gets more hype than this, and that one, like, I like that one. Well, I haven't tried it, but I like the color story of it, but I just feel like this is such an underrated palette from them. Also the new palettes like the Norm palette and things like that, they are stunning, the collab palettes, things like that, but this definitely is one that I feel like is underrated from them, and I really love this palette, which is why I chose it. Next up we have the prompt Not a Favorite but You Can't Get Rid Of, and I decided to go with my Anastasia Prism palette. I like this palette, but I don't love it, and this is definitely one that I have been considering decluttering, but it's also relatively new to my collection. I mean, it's not super new, I had it for over a year now, but this is a palette that I got second hand because this is a palette that I wanted when it first came out, but I thought like I wasn't really into color back then, so I was like, oh, it's too colorful for me. But I love the packaging, I just love the color story and the idea of this palette, and I was also like an Anastasia bandwagon about that because I loved the Modern Renaissance and Soft Glam palette, and they were like my first proper palettes, and I wanted like everything that Anastasia released. But I never picked this up because I always felt like, oh, it's not my type of color story because it's too colorful. As you know now, I love my colors. I own a lot of colorful palettes, so I was like, I don't know, this palette just haunted me, and I just felt like I really wanted it, so I decided to pick it up second hand. It was in very good condition when I got it, like no pants, nothing. That is all me, so I've used this quite a lot, but it's not the best palette. There's a lot of shades in here that I don't love, like Throne and Osiris. Don't like them, the like black base kind of shimmers, and if I want a black base shimmer I will 100% go for my multichromes from Cleona, like the jewel multichromes or similar to that. These are just very lackluster in comparison. There are really nice shades in here. There's also like a lot of orangey shades which are very repetitive in my collection, and the black isn't the best black, and it's just, I don't know, it's just my favorite palette, but I just can't get rid of it. I think it's because I wanted it for so long and now I have it, and maybe it's because it's still relatively new to me, but I am not ready to let this go, although I don't love it. For the next prompt we have Favorite Collab, and I think you're gonna pick a palette that a lot of other people probably picked for this prompt, and that is the Club Nebula palette by Kaleidos in collaboration with Angelica Nyqvist. I love this palette. It's such a clever idea. The color story is absolutely stunning. The shimmers are very special, very kind of like that indie formula. The mattes are very silky, very kind of bright, and the dark ones are like still colorful, but like it's just such a nice formula. The colors are amazing in here. It's very kind of creative. It makes me feel creative when I use this. I love this palette. It's definitely my favorite collab, not just of last year but ever. I do have a few collab palettes, but not that many, but I feel like even if I had more, this is definitely the one I will pick. Again, the packaging also is stunning, and yeah, this is definitely one that I'm so happy I decided to pick up. I tried to get it when it first released, but I did not manage to. It sold out instantly. I did not get it. I was actually really upset about it because I got up like in the middle of the night to buy it, but I managed to get it at restock, and I'm so happy I did because this is a beautiful palette. So for the next prompt we have my 2021 favorite, and I decided to go with my Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette because this is a palette that I both picked up last year, but it's also one that I really just fell in love with. It's always so difficult to open with the plastic packaging, but yeah, this is what the color story looks like. I mean, everyone has already seen this palette. It's a beautiful palette. It has like a lot of like mauve tones, but also like a bit more warmth in certain areas, and it's just a really nice palette. It creates like, you can create quite colorful looks with it, but also like quite neutral, and it's just a really nice color story. I think it's quite a unique color story, and yeah, I definitely fell in love with this palette last year. It's one that I wanted for such a long time, but I finally picked up last summer, and I played around with it quite a lot. I have one pan in here. I also had the shade in my pan was eyeshadows briefly, and I think I've used most of the shades in here, if not all, and I just really love this. I do think this is like my 2021 favorites. Again, it's really difficult to choose, but I just picked something that I actually picked up last year and I also loved using, which is this one. Next up we have the prompt, something you didn't expect to love, and this one is one that I still love so much and I did not expect to love it as much as I do, and this is the Through My Eyes palette from Colourpop. I don't think this has gotten enough hype because it's definitely my favorite Colourpop palette. I just loved, like, I love the color story, I love the kind of jewel tones in here, but it also has the really special shimmers, like this shimmer right here, this one right here. They're like super sparkly. This one as well, actually, super sparkly, super textured in a good way. It also has some really nice like mattes. I love this matte here, this one too, the yellow. It has like some mauve tones, and like it's just a really all-around beautiful palette. I have a lot of wear on this, as you can see. I've used it a lot and I just really love this palette, and I did not expect to love it as much as I do, because if you watched my last video, I don't think Colourpop is necessarily the best like quality brand, but this one is just one that I still adore and I don't think I'm ever gonna get rid of. Maybe one day, you know, but yeah, I just don't think this is going to be a palette that I get rid of anytime soon, and it's one that I still really love in my collection. So definitely the palette that I have in my collection that I did not expect to love as much as I do. Next up we have the prompt, a palette that sparks joy, and I decided to put my Pat McGrath Utopian Dream palette because first of all it's a very luxurious palette. I feel like it's just like, I feel so nice when I use this. It's like, it's such a nice experience, and that's one of the reasons why it sparks joy. But also I got this from my boyfriend on my birthday last year, so he has good memories as well, and it's one that I pull out every time I want like a palette for special occasions, because this just makes me feel special. So this is the palette that I decided to go with. I need to reach for this more on like an everyday basis because it's definitely expensive and I definitely need to get more use out of it, but it's probably the palette that sparks the most joy in my collection, which is why it's currently like a very special occasion palette for me. So the next prompt is one that kind of overlaps with a prompt in the previous video, and that is the newest palette in my collection. So I'm just going to go over this very briefly, but that is my Rose Quartz palette by Huda Beauty. I got this very recently. I was supposed to give it to a friend, but she already had it, so I decided to keep it, which I'm not disappointed with at all because I really like this. So this is my newest palette. I have not yet used it, but I can't wait to play around with this. I have swatched it around, not this one specifically, but I swatched it in store a couple times and it's so stunning, and yeah, I can't wait to play with this. But this is the newest palette in my collection. And then for the very last prompt we have my first palette that I used in 2022, and this palette it probably doesn't come as a surprise to you guys, but it is my Panda palette for the year, which is the Modern Renaissance palette. I've used this a lot. I've tried like to use it as much as possible. It is the palette that I used first because I don't think I used my stuff on the 1st of Jan because I was a bit hungover, it was for New Year's, but I think I wore this on the 2nd of January, and it's just a really easy palette to reach for. It wasn't like something that I didn't need anything special. It was just like to do an everyday type of look, and that is why this is perfect. And like I said, it's one that I want to get as much use out of this year as possible, so it was also the first palette that I reached for this year. And that is actually the last prompt of this video, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. I really hope you did enjoy this video, and if you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys.